He admits it. Celtics owner finally comes clean on Jaylen Brown trade, and what comes next might shock you. Boston, we need to talk. Because for the first time since that trade shook the entire NBA world, the man who actually approved sending Jaylen Brown out of Boston just sat down on live radio and told us the truth about what really happened behind closed doors. Not a press release, not a PR-approved statement, the real, unfiltered version. And that's not all. While Celtics ownership is opening up about the hardest decision of this era, a new breakdown is circulating right now that makes one bold claim. Jaylen Brown thrived as the unquestioned alpha of this team. But now, it's finally Jayson Tatum's turn to prove he can do it too. And the numbers behind that claim might change the way you look at this Celtics roster heading into next season. If you're a die-hard Celtics fan, hit that subscribe button right now, because today we're breaking down both of these stories in full. Let's get into it. Celtics owner Bill Chisholm breaks his silence. It's hard not to care. Let's rewind for a second, because if you somehow missed it, back in July, the Boston Celtics did something that nobody outside of the front office saw coming. They traded Jaylen Brown, their homegrown superstar, a 5-time All-Star, a 2-time All-NBA player, and the Finals MVP of the 2024 championship run, to the Philadelphia 76ers. And the return? Paul George, a 36-year-old veteran on a massive contract, a couple of draft assets, and a package that a lot of fans and analysts around the league considered underwhelming for a player of Brown's caliber. This wasn't just a basketball transaction, this was Boston trading a piece of its own championship identity. Jaylen Brown spent all 10 seasons of his career in green. He was the number 3 overall pick back in 2015. He helped drag this franchise to the NBA Finals in 2021 to 2022, and then 2 years later, he was right there again, this time finishing the job, winning it all, and taking home Finals MVP hardware in the process. Last season alone, with Jayson Tatum sidelined for most of the year recovering from a torn Achilles, Brown put together a career-high scoring season, averaging nearly 29 points a night to keep this team afloat. That's not a role player. That's not a guy you move for future flexibility. That's a franchise cornerstone. So when the trade actually happened, Celtics Nation didn't just react, they exploded. Social media was on fire. Sports radio in Boston was flooded with callers who felt blindsided, betrayed, even heartbroken. And at the center of the fallout was one man who, up until now, had mostly stayed quiet, Celtics owner Bill Chisholm. Chisholm took over as the lead governor of this franchise after buying the majority stake from the Grossbeck family. And ever since he stepped into that role, the roster has been in a near constant state of transformation. Last summer alone, Boston moved on from Drew Holiday, Kristaps Porzingis, Al Horford, and Luke Kornet, all in an effort to dodge the dreaded second apron tax threshold under the league's new financial rules. Then, this summer, the biggest domino of them all fell: Jaylen Brown. Now here's where it gets interesting. Earlier this week, Chisholm sat down for a lengthy, candid interview on The Greg Hill Show as part of the annual WEEI and NESN Jimmy Fund radio telethon. And for the first time, he didn't hide behind corporate talking points. He got real about how difficult this decision actually was for him, not just as an owner, but as a fan. Chisholm explained that this trade required him to be personally convinced before it happened. That's a telling detail. This wasn't a move he rubber-stamped from a spreadsheet. According to Chisholm, he genuinely believes the Celtics have one of the best front offices in the entire NBA, and he leaned heavily on that trust in his basketball operations staff before signing off on moving a player of Brown's stature. But he also admitted something that a lot of fans have been feeling too, that it's incredibly hard to separate the ownership side of his brain from the fan side of his brain. Sound familiar? Because that's exactly the internal conflict Celtics fans everywhere have been wrestling with since the trade broke. He went further, saying on a personal level, he genuinely liked Jaylen Brown as a human being, not just as a basketball player. He talked about the role Brown played in the Boston community, the relationships he built off the court, and how all of that will be sorely missed inside the organization. Chisholm made it clear, this wasn't some cold, purely financial calculation made without emotion. There was real weight behind this decision, and he knows exactly how much fans are going to be watching to see if it pays off. And that's really the crux of everything right now, isn't it? Whether this trade is remembered as a genius long-term power move or a franchise-altering mistake, all comes down to results. If Jaylen Brown goes to Philadelphia and thrives, and let's be honest, early buzz suggests the Sixers are already using this trade as a springboard, reportedly using assets and cap flexibility to pursue superstar-level additions like LeBron James, then every Celtics fan who's furious right now is going to feel that frustration multiply tenfold. Philadelphia suddenly looks like a legitimate title contender, and if Brown is thriving in that uniform while wearing a chip on his shoulder from how his Boston tenure ended, this story is only going to get louder. But the Celtics aren't sitting still either. Boston's counterbet here is built on three pillars: a fully healthy Jayson Tatum returning to superstar form, the addition of Paul George as a co-star, and the signing of Mitchell Robinson to shore up the front court. It's a calculated gamble that health and continuity can offset the loss of a top-5 wing talent. Brad Stevens and this front office are essentially betting that two very good stars plus internal development beats one true superstar plus one aging star who might not stay healthy. There was also a press conference back when the trade first went down, where Stevens and Chisholm addressed the media together for almost 45 minutes, an unusually long, transparent session for a franchise that typically keeps things buttoned up. Stevens opened by praising Brown's decade of contributions, both on the court and in the community, before pivoting into the basketball and financial reasoning behind the move. One thing that stood out from that session: Stevens confirmed the Celtics had been engaged in serious trade discussions involving a run at Giannis Antetokounmpo, with Brown reportedly being dangled as the centerpiece of Boston's offer. That pursuit fell apart, and instead of walking away and running things back, the front office pulled the trigger on the George deal anyway. Reporters pressed Stevens and Chisholm hard on whether the Celtics' handling of Brown's exit, reports suggested Brown felt disrespected by how negotiations shifted, could damage the franchise's reputation among future free agents and stars. Chisholm didn't dodge the question. He was blunt, essentially saying that if the organization's reputation had genuinely taken a hit because of how this was handled, that would not be acceptable, because of what it means to represent an organization with the history and standards of the Boston Celtics. That's a strong statement from an owner. It shows he understands this isn't just about one trade, it's about how star players around the league perceive Boston as a destination going forward. If word gets around that the Celtics don't handle their own legends with respect on the way out, that's a reputational cost that outlasts any single transaction. So where does that leave us? Chisholm has now publicly acknowledged the emotional and reputational stakes of this decision. He's staked his credibility, and to some degree the fan base's trust, on the idea that this front office made the right long-term call. The next several months, starting with how Jayson Tatum looks in his return, how Paul George fits alongside him, and how Jaylen Brown performs in Philadelphia, are going to determine whether Bill Chisholm's gamble becomes a defining triumph or a defining regret of his ownership tenure. Alright, that's story number one. But this next story takes things even deeper, because it's not just about what happened, it's about what has to happen next for this team to actually be good. Stick around. Jaylen Brown was the alpha. Now Jayson Tatum has to prove he can be one too. Here's a question that's dividing Celtics Twitter right now, and honestly, it's one of the more fascinating basketball debates in the entire league heading into this season. If Jayson Tatum is the better all-around player than Jaylen Brown, which most people who watch this team closely genuinely believe, and the Celtics just added Paul George on top of that, shouldn't this team logically be better than it was last year? According to a sharp new breakdown making the rounds, most Celtics fans don't actually believe that, and the reasoning behind that contradiction says a lot about how we got here. Let's start with the foundation of the argument. Last season, with Tatum sidelined for the vast majority of the year recovering from a torn Achilles, something happened that nobody fully expected. Jaylen Brown didn't just fill the void, he thrived in it. He evolved into the Celtics' undisputed number one option, and by every measure, he took his game to an entirely new level. He was putting up nearly 29 points a night, adding rebounds and playmaking on top of it, while shooting efficiently from the field, from three, and from the free throw line at a career-best clip. His usage rate climbed, and unlike a lot of players who see their efficiency crater when the offensive burden increases, Brown's numbers actually held steady or improved. He finished 6th in most valuable player voting. 6th. As the guy who had spent his whole career being labeled the 1B next to Tatum's 1A. For years, that dynamic, Tatum as the unquestioned top option, Brown as the elite second option, defined this Celtics core. It worked. It won a championship. But it also meant Tatum never truly had to operate as the single, undeniable focal point of an entire offense for a full, healthy season. Brown was always there. Even during Tatum's ascension, there was a safety net. This year, that safety net is gone. Brown is in Philadelphia now, and for the first time in his career, Jayson Tatum steps into a season where it is unquestionably his team, with no ambiguity, no 1A/1B conversation, no split billing. He'll have talented pieces around him, Paul George, Derek White, Peyton Pritchard, and others, but the ceiling and the floor of this Celtics season now rests almost entirely on his shoulders. And here's where it gets genuinely interesting from a psychological standpoint. Anyone who has followed Tatum's career knows he's described consistently as a deeply unselfish player and teammate. By all accounts, he was authentically happy for Brown last season, cheering him on from the sideline as Brown carried the offensive load. But there's also a very human, very real undercurrent here. The idea that some part of Tatum, watching Brown thrive in that exact role he'd occupied for most of his own career, wanted his shot at doing the same thing. That's not a knock on Tatum's character, that's just competitive nature. Every elite athlete wants to know what they're capable of when the offense runs entirely through them. Now he gets to find out. And the questions swirling around this Celtics season are genuinely fascinating. Does Tatum respond to full-time number one option duty by becoming an even more aggressive scorer than Brown was? Or does he take a different approach entirely, reading opposing defenses' double teams more efficiently and posting a career high in assists instead of just piling up points? Could we see Tatum flirting with triple-doubles on a semi-regular basis? Does his fourth-quarter, clutch-time game take a leap now that he knows there's no one else to hand the ball to when it matters most? And maybe the biggest question of all, can he actually top Brown's 6th-place MVP finish from a season ago? But here's the part of this conversation that makes it so complicated, and honestly, so revealing about how fans actually process basketball. There's a strange contradiction running through the fan base right now, and it goes something like this. Ask most die-hard Celtics fans, and you'll typically hear 5 things that they all agree on. 1. Jaylen Brown is an excellent player, but Jayson Tatum is the better, more complete all-around basketball player. 2. Brown had a genuinely special, elevated season last year as the clear number 1 option. 3. Tatum has looked sharp coming back from injury and is expected to have a monster year as this team's unquestioned top option. 4. Even accounting for his limitations, a healthy Paul George paired with a healthy Jayson Tatum is, on paper, a more dangerous combination than Jaylen Brown operating on his own ever was. And 5. Despite believing all of that, most fans still think this year's Celtics team is going to be worse than last year's team. Stop and sit with that for a second. If Tatum is better than Brown, and you're adding a player of George's caliber into the equation, shouldn't simple math say this team improves? That's the tension driving so much of the uncertainty around Boston heading into this season. It's not really about talent evaluation. Most people agree Tatum is the more talented, more well-rounded player. It's about continuity, chemistry, health history, and the simple fact that Brown's specific brand of alpha dog production last year was, in some ways, lightning in a bottle. Replicating that isn't guaranteed just because you're theoretically the better player on paper. There's also the injury variable hanging over everything. Tatum already had to sit out a critical Game 7 in the playoffs due to injury, and with Boston no longer having a Jaylen Brown caliber fallback option if something happens to Tatum again, the margin for error this season is razor thin. Unlike when Milwaukee traded away a superstar and had no second star left standing, Boston does still have that one true superstar in Tatum. That's the silver lining Celtics fans are clinging to as they navigate this uncertain new chapter of franchise history. If Tatum stays healthy and rises to the occasion, this era of Celtics basketball has a real chance to be defined not by what they lost in Jaylen Brown, but by what Jayson Tatum proved he could become without him. Let's also talk about the supporting cast for a second, because Tatum's success this year isn't happening in a vacuum. Derek White remains one of the most reliable two-way guards in the league, and his ability to space the floor and defend at an elite level takes pressure off Tatum on both ends. Peyton Pritchard, fresh off a breakout stretch and a team-friendly contract that's already looking like a steal, gives Boston a secondary shot creator who can take some of the ball-handling burden in the fourth quarter. And then there's Paul George, a player who, when healthy, is still capable of putting up all-star caliber numbers, even if his recent injury history makes him a variable rather than a guarantee. If George can stay on the floor for 65-plus games, this offense suddenly has multiple shot creators instead of relying on Tatum to manufacture everything himself. Mitchell Robinson's addition also can't be overlooked. Boston's front court took a hit when Al Horford's second stint with the team came to an end, and Robinson brings rim protection, elite offensive rebounding, and lob-catching gravity that this roster hasn't consistently had in years. If Robinson stays healthy, and that's always the question mark with him, his presence alone could make Tatum's job easier by clearing driving lanes and cleaning up second-chance opportunities. There's also a coaching element worth mentioning. Joe Mazzulla has built his system around versatility and positionless basketball, and how he chooses to deploy this new-look roster around Tatum will say a lot about whether this team can replicate the offensive rhythm they found last season around Brown. Does Mazzulla lean into more pick-and-roll actions with Tatum and Robinson? Does he unlock more transition opportunities with Pritchard pushing the pace? These are the wrinkles that could determine whether Boston's offense feels seamless or disjointed through the first few months of the season. So when you put these two stories together, Bill Chisholm publicly admitting how emotionally difficult this trade was for him, and this growing debate about whether Jayson Tatum can truly replicate Brown's alpha-level production, you start to see the full picture of where this Celtics season stands right now. This isn't a team that's just moving on from a beloved star. This is a franchise betting its entire immediate future on the idea that continuity, health, and Jayson Tatum's ceiling as a true number one option can outweigh what they gave up. So here's what we know heading into this season. Bill Chisholm has finally opened up, admitting this trade tested him personally as both an owner and a lifelong fan. And now, the entire fan base is watching one question play out in real time. Can Jayson Tatum step into the alpha role and prove he can do exactly what Jaylen Brown just did, or even surpass it? We're going to be tracking every single development this season, right here on Celtics Daily Hub. If you want to stay ahead of every trade update, every roster shakeup, and every big performance from Jayson Tatum as he steps into this new role, make sure you're subscribed with notifications turned on, because we are not missing a single moment of this story. Drop a comment down below and let us know. Do you think Jayson Tatum tops what Jaylen Brown did last season? Or do the Celtics take a step back without him? We'll see you in the next one. Let's go Celtics!